State Water Board may be present, but the State Water Board is not taking any formal action. So again, please, or for the first time, please check that your screen name reflects your first and last name. And additionally, the public chat is not available. Next slide. Thank you. So in a moment, we will hear from the Division of Water Rights staff, and they'll present on drought conditions and potential drought actions that could be implemented in the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds. Afterwards, we'll open the floor to public comments. And after public comments, we'll go over some next steps and we'll adjourn at 4 p.m. Next slide, please. And next slide. Thank you. What we're discussing here today is important and it's impactful, and we recognize how personal this can be. And we want to create a space where people can share their input on the topic respectfully and be heard and respected. And to help us accomplish this, we have some ground rules for this meeting. The first is that this is a public discussion. The second is listen actively and with an open mind. And the third is to stay on point and on time. We have limited time today, so please respect the group's time and help everyone have an opportunity to be heard. Please keep comments brief and to the point. Next slide. So if you would like to provide a verbal public comment, please enter into the chat your first and last name, your title, your organization, and your email address in case we need to follow up with you after the meeting. You can send this to the person identified as comments here. And this will be your virtual speaker card, which you can submit at any time during the meeting. So again, if you would like to give a public comment, please submit your intent or virtual speaker card by entering your first and last name, your organization, your title, and your email address into the chat and send it to the comments here. If you're calling in and not participating through the Zoom app, you can express your intent by raising your hand by entering *9 into your dial pad at any point during the meeting. Alternatively, we are accepting written public comments during the meeting. For those that do not want to provide their comments verbally, please send your written public comment to scottshastadrought@waterboards.ca.gov. The purpose of today's meeting is to provide information and to listen to your input on potential drought actions that could be implemented in the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds during ongoing drought. Staff will not be responding to questions or comments today, but if you have questions, we invite you to email it to that email address again. It's scottshastadrought@waterboards.ca.gov, and staff will consider how best to answer your questions and follow up. With that, I want to end this meeting overview and move on to staff presentation, starting with Anne Marie.
Thank you, Jalen. Good afternoon. My name is Anne Marie Orr, and I'm the program manager for the Water Quality Certification and Public Trust section at the State Water Board. I'd like to give you a brief overview of the topics that our team is going to cover today. We'll be starting with an overview of the current drought conditions and the governor's statewide drought proclamation. We'll be going over the risks to fisheries, potential drought response actions that are being considered by the agencies, and then funding opportunities that can support those voluntary actions. And since emergency regulations are a possible response action, we want to give you some information on what they might entail. And finally, we'll wrap up with how to keep informed about what's happening as time passes before we open up the floor to hear your comments. Next slide. As most of you are likely aware, there's an exceptional drought occurring, and we know many of you have firsthand experience with how dry the local conditions are. This overview map provides just additional context on the scope of the drought across a larger area. California on a whole is facing extreme and exceptional drought conditions over most of its area. And you can see that it extends beyond California and affects most of the Western United States, which is also facing the consequences from drought, including wildfires, water restrictions, and damages to agriculture. Next slide. This is, if we zoom in on Siskiyou County, you can see the picture doesn't get any more rosy. Most of the county is experiencing extreme drought conditions. Next slide. In May of 2021, the governor declared a drought state of emergency throughout California and cited critical low flows in locations like the Klamath River watershed. As part of the Drought Proclamation, the governor also cited the need to prioritize protection of human health and safety and protection of minimum in-stream flows for salmon, steelhead, and other native fishes. Next slide. As part of the Drought Proclamation, state agencies were advised to take specific actions, including directives for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, or CDFW, to recommend minimum in-stream flows for protection of fisheries, for the State Water Board to work with water users on voluntary measures to meet the recommended minimum flows, and then for the State Water Board and CDFW to coordinate and consider emergency regulations if the volunteer actions are not sufficient. Now I'm going to turn things over to Dan Worth, who is a senior on my staff, followed by Joe Croteau of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, to discuss the drought conditions specific to the Scott and Shasta River watersheds. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. Again, my name is Daniel Worth, and I'm a senior environmental scientist within the State Water Board's Division of Water Rights. Today, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the current drought and stream flow conditions within the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds. Recent events within the last year have created a cause for concern regarding salmon and other native fish within the Scott River watershed. From October to mid-November 2020, low flow conditions delayed Chinook salmon from accessing spawning habitat in the Scott River tributaries. During November to mid-December 2020, approximately 1,700 coho salmon were also delayed from accessing spawning habitat by low flow conditions. Recent Scott River Chinook salmon population declines are outpacing overall declines in the Klamath Basin. Next slide, please. Similar to the Scott River, recent events have triggered fishery concerns within the Shasta River watershed. In the last 2 years, out-migrating conditions for Chinook and coho salmon in the Shasta River have been critically impaired. During May and June of 2021, we witnessed the lowest flow conditions on record for this time frame. Recent low flow conditions have resulted in lethal water temperatures for salmonids in the Shasta River. Next slide, please. This graph shows historic in-stream flows at the Fort Joan gauge on the Scott River. The top portion of this figure is cut off so we can focus on the low flows within the figure. The purple line is the average flow for all water years. The blue cloud shows the range of flows for the 5 years on record with the lowest month of May flows. The dark blue line in this is this year's flows. The red line shows the emergency drought recommendations submitted to the State Water Board on June 15th of this year by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. You can see in May and June of this year that flows, which are represented by the dark blue line, start dropping towards the very driest of the dry years on record, which again are represented by the light blue lines and encompassed within the blue cloud. The current water year represents one of the most severe droughts on record for the Scott River watershed. Next slide, please. This figure shows the Shasta River flows at the Wairika gauge with the same line coloration as the previous figure. For much of 2021, flows have been the lowest or near the lowest on record. Like the Scott River, the current water year represents one of the most severe droughts on record for the Shasta River watershed. These extreme low flow conditions have led to significant concern for our native fish and wildlife species in these watersheds. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Department of Fish and Wildlife staff.
Sound check, Dan. Can everybody hear me? Somebody?
Yes, we can hear you, Joe.
Okay, so thank you, Dan. Thanks for getting me into this part of the presentation. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Croteau. I'm a program manager with CDFW and have primary responsibilities on restoration, environmental permitting, juvenile salmon monitoring, and fisheries restoration grants in Siskiyou County. I've been managing our lands and wildlife program exactly 1 year to the day. I have been assigned as one of the 2 regional tribal liaisons in our region since about December 2020. I have lived in the Scott Valley for approximately 21 years and have worked for CDFW a little over 24 years on a variety of habitat conservation, wildlife, and fisheries teams. I've been looking forward to today's workshop ever since it got scheduled, and I'm glad to see how many people showed up. Next slide. Some things that I want to, some main points I want to drive home and following my own notes here. Click, please, or next. So today's focus is on the drought emergency regulations. We sent, no, not yet. We sent separate letters to the State Water Board on May 3rd and June 15th this year. The May 3rd letter was prior to the emergency drought proclamation and intended to begin a flow objective setting process on the Scott River. The June 15th letter to the State Water Board was in response to the emergency drought proclamation and intended to inform emergency regulations on the Scott and Shasta rivers for this year. The recommendations discussed today should not be construed as CDFW recommendations for long-term sustainability of the salmon fisheries. They are intended only for minimally supporting our fisheries during this emergency drought. Next. We aim to provide recommendations that benefit the aquatic resources in these systems, specifically 3 salmonids that have ecological, commercial, and cultural value. Next. We understand that different needs and strive to balance them. There are some restoration and voluntary efforts that make positive contributions, but much more is needed. We need community leaders to organize water users to ensure resources are balanced. And in a year like this, when everything is super dry, wildfires are burning, we're striving first for voluntary efforts. Next. So just an intro slide to Scott River. I don't have a lot of slides for each river to keep it brief. For the Scott River during an emergency drought, we focus primarily on the Klamath National Forest water right, which is considered to be the low bar to sustain salmon in critically dry years. Our recommendations for this effort deviate in a couple months where our subject matter experts agreed with differences based on field notes and current conditions. Our ability to be more strategic than a single gauge target is hampered by access and funding. I hope the next 3 slides regarding the Scott River will make sense to you. Next. So here's one important piece of information was put together by our subject matter experts. We plotted annual discharge from 1942 to 2020 and then sorted by 5 water year types, ranging from extremely wet to critically dry. We then calculated average September flows and separated them by pre-1980 and post-1980. You can see a significant sudden drop in available flows for fish in all years, but particularly concerning is critically dry years. You can see, and just have the orange circles there, pre-1980, we were averaging about 33 CFS, post-1980, 9.7. You can see that in one click, please. You can see that even in normal water years, we're not generally attaining the Klamath National Forest right of 3rd CFS in September. So in order to even get to where we think we need to be, we need wet and extremely wet years right now. The main point of this slide is to emphasize, one, that the Klamath National Forest right was only supposed to be bottom bar in critically dry years, and two, recent changes have occurred, resulting in reduced average September flows when similar amounts of discharge are available. Next slide. So this is kind of a busy slide. I'll try to get through this. This slide demonstrates how Chinook respond to flows during the time period of September 1 to October 31. Click, and we'll gray that part of the calendar out. Now I'll run this quickly through 3 comparisons. Click, or next. The first comparison is 2009 versus 2010. You'll see an 89% versus 54% escapement rate. The poorer of the 2 years shows that the flows in the Scott River do not exceed 30 CFS until November. So, which reinforces the need for us to be thinking about September through October, no later than the end of October for Chinook. Next. Another striking comparison here is 2014 versus 2015. Recall 2014 was also a critical dry year, but there were enough flows in late October to move adult Chinook above the weir. And so obviously we're not shooting for end of October to move fish, but you'll see that in those years, in the weeks leading up to the end of October, in the bad year, it never got better. In 2015, we had a situation late October they moved. So this striking the difference in the escapement between those 2 years. Next comparison. This last comparison in green is 2018 through 2020. The different results here are pretty obvious. This is really striking to us, and obviously 30% escapement rates are no good. We think we can have the water available to get them moving, and you'll see that the flows in 2019 allowed Chinook to move through September and October. Next. So I obviously worked with Dan on a graph for the Scott River. He explained pretty well what's going on here. I want to make a point here that the red line is our 2021 drought emergency recommendations for the Scott River Fort Jones gauge. We're comparing the recommended flow versus the driest years, average of all years in 2021 flows. Next. One of the deviations I pointed out earlier is in September, the Klamath National Forest right is 30. We think it takes about 33 CFS to get the Chinook between the gauge and Shackelford and in the lower parts of the Scott River. So we need to be striving for that in order to get fish into their spawning areas. Next. This is the biggest difference we are thinking about and recommending. The Klamath National Forest right during the month of November is 200 CFS. Based on field notes and correspondence with other entities in the past, we think 60 CFS is a minimum rock bottom flow in order to get coho moving up into the main stem and towards French Creek. And then next. Same again with December, National Forest rights 200. We're recommending 150 based on field notes. It took at least 150 CFS, and it seemed to be able to move fish into through the tailings reach of the Scott River into Sugar Creek and presumably the upper forks of the Scott River. Next slide. That's my last slide for the Scott. I got to get to my notes. So for the Shasta River during emergency drought, our recommendations lean heavily on the McBain and Trush 2014 report. Again, we consider deviations for reasons mentioned earlier. My next and only slide for the Shasta represents a comparison of our recommendations compared to estimated unimpaired flows, average impaired flows, and flows to date in 2021. As an aside, to Today, the Shasta River dipped to a new historical recorded low of 6.8 CFS at the Wairika gauge. So please go to my last slide. This is a slide, and the fact that I only have one slide for the Shasta is not intended to show that we're thinking about it less. We did a little bit of work up front prior to the Drought Proclamation on the Scott River, and we think there's a lot of work actually detailed within this frame here. So the red line is obviously our recommendations. The green line is unimpaired flows from DS 2007. This is a model number estimated from known inputs from an upper basin gauge. And this has to be modeled because water diversions occur every year. The impaired blue line is average daily flow for the specific date for the entire period of record of 1933 to 2020, measured at the USGS gauge in Wairika. This flow has actually happened. We call it impaired to highlight that a significant amount of water has been removed, stored, or impounded. The black line represents what we've seen to year this date. I want to point out that the post flow that occurred in late May at the request of the agencies, with some phone calls, we were able to coordinate enough voluntary flows to actually achieve the recommended flow for a short period of time. Unfortunately, it was not sustainable to lean on just a few landowners, and then the flows dropped to historical level lows, which created a lot of concern. We think it was the right thing to try to do, and we'll probably hear some comments about this. We are concerned that if action is not taken immediately to secure drought emergency minimum flows, then oversummering Coho and Chinook, returning Chinook in September will face nearly uninhabitable conditions. So maybe one more click. I might have one more little grayed out area. Oh, there's my pulse flow. Sorry, I should have had to do that. And then go ahead and click. There's my 7 CFS. And then, so I've got a little grayed out area, and this is the last thing I'll show. This is the time right now when we are trying to give the few coho a chance to oversummer, and in September the Chinook are going to start returning really early in September, and we need to get those flows back up to around 50 CFS in order to make that happen. So that's it for me, Dan. I'll let you guys move on to the next slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. So now we're going to switch gears and talk about potential response actions that we are considering. And because of the extreme nature of this drought, and as well as the recent flow and temperature impacts to native fish in these watersheds, we're considering a suite of potential response actions to try and avoid catastrophic effects. Next slide. So among these actions that we're considering would be, well, our first and most desirable scenario is for voluntary actions to result in sufficient in-stream flows. Some possible examples of voluntary actions would be in-stream flow dedications or forbearance agreements, or agreements to not withdraw water. To support these voluntary actions, we want to talk about some of the funding opportunities for water conservation or efficiency projects. We're also working on temporary urgency changes to water rights for drinking water and in-stream benefits. We're considering a drought emergency regulation for minimum in-stream flows. And ideally, we would want to try and incorporate a pathway for voluntary actions to reduce or eliminate the need for future curtailments. And of course, we're also looking at increased enforcement against illegal diversions. Next slide. And now I want to take some time to acknowledge that there have been a number of important voluntary projects in these watersheds. In the Scott River watershed, voluntary actions have included temporary and long-term water leasing through Caltrout and the Scott River Trust. The Shasta Safe Harbor group of landowners are working on flow and habitat improvement efforts, and many other landowners have made water efficiency improvements to their operations. CDFW will come back on in a moment and review some other voluntary actions that have happened in recent years as well. But While these efforts are extremely important, there's a lot more that needs to be done to ensure adequate protection of the public trust resources. And this is especially important during these drought conditions. So, and a big part of why we're holding this meeting today is to really encourage conversations to solicit ideas of voluntary actions that can be done to help improve the stream habitat conditions. Next slide. And I did want to mention that this is one tool that can be useful to both water rights users and in-stream beneficial uses. And it is the use of in-stream flow dedications under Water Code Section 1707. This provision allows water right holders to use all or a part of their water right to support in-stream uses for the benefit of fish and wildlife. And if people apply for an in-stream flow dedication, it has two primary benefits. The first obvious benefit is for fish and wildlife, because leaving water in stream can improve habitat conditions. The second, less obvious benefit is to the water right holder, because in California, water rights law includes a use it or lose it type provision, meaning if you don't exercise your right for a period of 5 or more years, your right may be subject to forfeiture. Water Code Section 1707 allows you to use your water right in stream by adding fish and wildlife as a beneficial use. But in other words, a water right holder doesn't have to divert water to be considered as using their water right if they have gone through this process. And so it would protect your water right from the use it or lose it provisions of water right law. And another benefit of using the in-stream flow dedication is that it's completely flexible, and what water right holders can choose when they want to divert and when they want to use the water in stream, so they can go back and forth. Now, I do want to mention that there is a cost of time and a fee to implement one of these 1707 water right changes, but it could be helpful in protecting your water right in the long term. And we have a web page that's listed here if you would like more information on that. And now I'm going to turn this presentation over to Tina Bartlett of CDFW. Tina?
There, sound check. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tina Bartlett. I'm the regional manager for the northern region of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm pleased to be here today to talk with you about some voluntary funding opportunities for conservation actions. I will highlight 4 grant funds, provide examples of eligible projects, describe the timing for some solicitation notices, where it's been identified so far how much money is available and when, and provide you a few examples of projects funded to date. The first grant fund opportunity is Proposition 1, Stream Flow Enhancement Program funding. This funding is for planning and implementation for stream flow enhancement projects. There's approximately $15 to $20 million slated for the 2021 grant solicitation. The Wildlife Conservation Board implements this program and will have the public solicitation notice released in September, with funding available for projects next spring. Next slide, please. This slide shows a list of project types that qualify for this funding. There is a requirement for a 20-year benefit for the projects funded by Proposition 1 bond funds. In 2017, the Wildlife Conservation Board funded over $2 million to the Hart Ranch in Shasta Valley for on-farm water use efficiencies and in-stream dedication of conserved water. In 2021, 2 projects received funding for water use efficiency and flow enhancement planning projects in Scott River. Some of the examples I just want to highlight are forbearance agreements that have been implemented, off-channel water storage, irrigation, ditch lining or piping for distribution and conveyance efficiencies, stock water systems, stream flow gauging, changing points of diversion, and even rotating crop fallowing with groundwater forbearance. I just want to mention while this slide is up that I don't have a slide on the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Proposition 1 restoration grants, but we do have funding available under that program as well. That program is it funds habitat enhancement, protects habitat, and provides fish passage. $39 million was awarded in California in 2021. The next solicitation date is still to be determined. This year, the Siskiyou Land Trust was awarded $1.16 million for Scott River Headwaters Phase 3 Conservation Easement Project. And since 2016, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has awarded more than $5 million in Proposition 1 funding in the Scott and Shasta watersheds for project planning and implementation and conservation easements. For Department of Fish and Wildlife Proposition 1 restoration grants, if you have questions, please contact Philip Kramer at Department of Fish and Wildlife. His name is spelled with 1 L, PHILIP .Kramer, CRAMER at wildlife.ca.gov. The current slide shows information on the Fisheries Restoration Grants Program that CDFW oversees. It's both a state and federal fund source that may be used for water conservation measures. The public solicitation for this grant will be released in the spring of 2022. Project proposals are due in the late spring, and these projects will be approved in the late fall, early winter of 2022, and will be funded thereafter, having grant agreements in place. For 2021, a Scott River Habitat Enhancement Project and a Fish Passage Improvement Project are on the contingency funding list for SWRCB funding. Next slide, please. One fund source that we have currently available in a non-competitive opportunity is the Proposition 68 grant program for habitat enhancement and restoration. No solicitation period is needed for this funding. We can send the application form to interested applicants and assist in conversations with WCB. Like Proposition 1, Prop 68 eligible projects must have a 20-year benefit. Water conservation projects could include things like ditch lining, irrigation efficiencies, rotational fallowing that provide in-stream flow benefits, habitat restoration, and other project types. Thank you for the opportunity to share these funding opportunities with you today.
Thanks, Tina. Next slide, please. So, as Joe and Dan discussed earlier, CDFW has submitted flow recommendations to provide for minimum short-term survival conditions and passage for the Scott River and the Shasta River. And if voluntary measures are either not taken or are inadequate to meet these flows, the State Water Board is directed to consider emergency regs to establish drought minimum in-stream flows. So I wanted to just take a moment to talk about that a little bit. Next slide. if an emergency regulation is pursued and adopted, it would be expected to have several components. One of which might be an information order to gather information regarding existing or planned diversions of surface water or groundwater. It would also include specifications for flow requirements to identify the minimum levels of necessary flow and a description of how the requirements will be implemented. In this case, the method for implementing water use curtailments to meet the flow requirements. These curtailments can extend to all water users if necessary, which means it could include the post-1914 water rights, pre-1914 water rights, riparian water rights, and groundwater pumping. As far as the timeline for adopting an emergency regulation might go, although it's all conceptual at this point, I can tell you that it would likely take at least 6 to 10 weeks to draft the regs, release them for public comment, have them adopted by the Water Board, and then approved by the Office of Administrative Law. Next slide, please. I also wanted to go over potential emergency regulation allowances. There would be allowances for the continued diversion to meet human health and safety needs. It would be about 55 gallons per person per day when there's no alternative source of water. Other potential continued diversion allowances would be in if there are non-consumptive water uses, and the simplest example of a non-consumptive water use is when there's either no diversion from the water source or no diminishment of the water source, for example, a hydropower facility or a small hydropower operation. Substitutions of stored water releases that result in no net decreases of flow, or for water supplies that are used to maintain grid reliability, firefighting and fire prevention, air quality, public health, and critical infrastructure. We'd also like to craft a minimum diversion allowance for livestock watering, because we do understand that it is a large water, not large, there is water use for these purposes in the watershed. So we'll be looking for feedback from you on this. Next slide. These are just some ways to keep informed. There are 2 websites. We have a specific Scott and Shasta River Drought web page, as well as a Water Board Drought web page. We have a email subscription list that you can sign up for. That will be used to provide drought notices, water supply forecasts, and any kind of updates we might have on this issue. And I also want to say that we are really looking for your feedback, and there's an email address included here that we would encourage you to continue to send, to submit your comments to, with ideas for voluntary options, ideas for emergency regulation. You know, we're still looking for solutions for constructive comments. This recording will be posted on our website, as was mentioned earlier, and I would expect that we will have another one of these public meetings in the month of August. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Jenna Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Next slide, please. Okay, so we will be transitioning to the public comment portion of today's meeting. So as a recap, there are a couple of ways that you can provide your public comment. The first is to provide it verbally. To state your intent to provide a verbal comment, please enter in your first and last name, title, organization, and email address into the chat and send it to the comments here person. So this can be done at any time throughout the public comment in case you don't currently have an intent to speak, but you decide to later. So for folks that are calling in and not participating through the Zoom app, you can express your intent by raising your hand by pressing *9 into your dial pad. The second option is to email a written comment to the email that's there on the screen. So it would be scott.shasta.drought@waterboards.ca.gov. So for verbal commenters, each speaker will be given 3 minutes to provide their comment. I will announce 3 speakers at a time, and when I indicate it's your turn, you should receive a message inviting you to unmute your microphone. For folks calling in, we will announce you by the last 3 digits of your phone number, and you will receive a verbal cue to unmute yourself by pressing *6. And we will start the clock when your comment begins. After 3 minutes, we will thank you for your comment and mute your microphone. If you need more time, we encourage you to email the rest of your comment to scott.shastadrought@waterboards.ca.gov. And if we have time after everyone has given their comment, we will give you another opportunity to present. This is not a question and answer session. Our intent with this meeting is to hear from you constructive input, and staff will not be responding to questions or comments during this time. And again, if you have any questions, we encourage you to email it to us using that scott.shastadrought@waterboards.ca.gov address. And we will consider how best to follow up and respond with answers. Next slide, please. So again, here are some of the ground rules. We want to create a space where everyone can share and be heard. So please help us create this type of space by following these ground rules. And with that, I'm going to first invite any of our board members to make some remarks or to provide comments. We have a couple. Okay, seeing none, I'd like to open the floor to any tribal chairpersons or council members. And I believe if you're a participant, you might not be able to freely unmute yourself. So if you're a tribal chairperson or council member, or even one of our board members that might be having difficulty, please raise your hand through your taskbar. You should have a feature under your reactions for you to raise your hand. Okay. Well, seeing none, I will move on to any state elected officials or local elected officials. Again, feel free or please raise your hand using the reactions feature on your Zoom taskbar. Okay. Seeing none. I will open it up to public comments. So the first 3 commenters will be Michael Beltchick, Joanne Lee, and Nathaniel Kane. So First up, we have Michael Beltchick.
Good afternoon. Hi, can I start my video or, oh geez, I'm wasting time already here. Hi, my name is Michael Beltchick and I'm a senior water policy analyst for the Yurok tribe, and the tribal council has asked me to deliver some comments today. The tribe has been active in the Shasta and Scott water issues for over 25 active years right now. The tribe has a federally recognized fishing right, which confers a water right that's tied to the fish health. I want to point out that there's a crisis going on right now in the Shasta and Scott. After years of trying to fight for restoration projects and more water in the river, it's clear that we're losing the battle. These fish are becoming extinct right in front of our eyes, and urgent action is needed. We strongly support the in-stream flow emergency requirements, but we want to point out that these are just bare bones minimums. You can see from Mr. Croteau's presentation that particularly on the Shasta, these represent but a fraction of what used to be there. But for a drought, we support these as emergency in-stream flow requirements. I want to point out that the Shasta River has additional problems in that the flow varies excessively. We've seen 75 to 80% drops in less than a 24-hour period. And every time you see those on the water graph, on the hydrograph, you know that there's thousands of fish that have been stranded and killed. These are lethal events and they must be stopped. The basin has broader problems, but we think this is a start. The Shasta and Scott rivers are vital elements of the entire Klamath Basin. The tribe has worked tirelessly on all aspects of fisheries restoration, whether it comes to Trinity main stem flows, Klamath main stem flows, undamming the Klamath, and also the Shasta and Scott. We look to where the fish tell us to look, and that's where we focus. We would like the Water Board to adopt the emergency regulations. We would like the Water Board to ensure that the existing regulations are being followed, that water mastering is provided where appropriate, where not happening right now. We'd like to see more coordination happening on the Shasta River. And for goodness sake, for all the adjudication and laws and everything, it's clear that we're losing our fish right now. Adult salmon have not been able to access their spawning grounds on the Scott River for 5 of the last 7 years. I don't think you need to have a fisheries degree to understand that if the fish cannot get to their spawning grounds, they will go extinct. And we're witnessing that in front of our eyes. And we urge the Water Board to have the courage to adopt these regulations and save these fish. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So I've been informed that some folks have retracted their intent to speak. If that's the case, feel free to let me know, or if I announce names and don't call on you. I believe Jojo Lee, feel free to unmute yourself.
Can I just say one more thing before we begin this? The reason we put the 3-minute time limit on each speaker was so that everyone can have an opportunity to speak. But if there is time at the end, you may speak again. I don't want to rush people unnecessarily. And I believe cameras may be turned on, if I'm not mistaken. Gentlemen, you could let me know.
Yes, there's a 3-minute timer being shared. And thank you for providing.
Thank you.
Okay, hi. My name is Jojo and I'm with the California Indian Environmental Alliance, but I'm also a California native. I'm a member of the North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians. So I'm just gonna read a letter that we drafted. The California Indian Environmental Alliance, CIA for short, urges the state of California to support cool water flows in the Scott and Shasta rivers to support fish passage on rivers that rely on those flows for salmon now facing extinction. Low water levels and river temperature are the cause of the parasites additionally killing fish in the Klamath. Agricultural priorities in California's drought-afflicted water bodies highlight the capitalist interest of those gaining from the export of unsustainable agriculture products like almonds, which we have seen an exceptional increase this last year, producing more than ever before in the last decade. SIA has been sharing information on how to eat fish safely since we established in 2006 because of high mercury levels from the gold rush. Wild-caught salmon is one of the safer fish to eat and are especially important for pregnant mothers in the development of their babies. Taking water from the rivers will not only kill off the salmon, but it will take away a main subsistence food and core part of cultural practices for many California tribes. This would be an egregious act by the state of California to do so. To take water from the rivers would be an act of religious discrimination as well as a form of cultural genocide, adding to a cycle already perpetuated by settler colonial societies. We have to first remember that this is native land and native people are humans and have the right to practice their culture and eat their traditional foods without state barriers. There are other ways of managing that do not involve dewatering rivers in violation of Native American rights to cultural subsistence, as stated by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The tribal beneficial uses definition adopted by the State Water Resource Control Board are in alignment with the intent of the Truth and Healing Council to work with California tribes to accurately represent the experience of California Native peoples. However, what is the purpose of the Truth and Healing Council if you're going to continue to perpetuate the mistreatment of California Native peoples through this project? Please uphold Governor Newsom's apology as stated in N-15-19 and protect not only the cultural practice of California Native peoples, but also the existence of salmon and the continuance of California Indian peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Next, we have Nathaniel Kane, followed by Danielle Ray and Conrad Fisher. And Nathaniel, if you would like to mute yourself and provide your comment.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nat Kane. I'm the Executive Director of Environmental Law Foundation, and I'm here on behalf of ELF and the Karuk tribe today. I want to thank board staff and CDFW for putting this presentation together. It was really helpful and really great to see the attention that the board is now putting on the issues in the Scott. But as we've known, and we've known for some time, flows in the Scott are a disaster this year. And they were a disaster last year. And they've, in all but the wettest years recently, they've been a disaster for decades. And I want to emphasize that, and this information is in the information provided by CDFW and in the presentation today. This is a human-caused disaster. You know, before the 70s or 80s, even in these dry years, there was enough flow for basic fish survival, and that is just not the case anymore. I want to emphasize that the board has a duty to act here under the public trust doctrine. It has an affirmative duty to protect the public trust in these fishery resources as far as feasible. And if it decides not to act, it owes the public an explanation as to why this is the rare case, why it is abandoning its interest, the people's interest in these fishery resources. Today, the Karuk tribe and ELF filed a petition for emergency rulemaking at the state board, and we're asking the board to adopt emergency regulations to protect flows in the Scott right now this year. There is no reason to wait 6 to 8 weeks. The science is there, the law is there. The Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court has confirmed the board's authority to act and its duty to act, and it must act now. Some of the solutions, the voluntary solutions that were discussed, have merit, but honestly, if they were going to solve the problem this year, we would have seen that happen already, and we would not be seeing flows fall off a cliff as we're seeing them now. So again, on behalf of ELF and the Karuk tribe, we urge immediate, swift action to enact emergency regulations and curtail diversions, because that is the only way we are going to save these species for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat Kane. Appreciate your comments. Next, we have Danielle Ray, followed by Conrad Fisher and Lamani Hutt. Danielle Ray, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hean, way duchtin yo holiet, Hosaho not holiet, Frank wahontating, Jackson wahontating, Kogrov wahontating, Metelding wahontating. Hello, my name is Danielle Ray Frank. I'm a member of the Hoopa Valley tribe, and I want to talk a little bit less about the effect the dams have on the rivers and a little more about the effect that they have on the people. Growing up on a small Indian reservation, I can tell you as Native youth, adversity is pretty much all we know. We face challenges every day, and we have forever. Our people have faced challenges since time immemorial. Our ancestors fought for our right to our land. They fought for our fishing rights. They fought for our language. They fought for us to have the right to be Native, to be who we are, and to celebrate that. They fought for us to continue what they fought for our culture, and they fought for us to continue it. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do. That's who we're supposed to be. And with all this going on, we're not allowed to, without the rivers in proper condition, with the Scott so low, and with it being a tributary to the river on our reservation, we're not allowed to access our resources the way we should be. We're not able to participate in our Native culture the way we should be. It doesn't thrive the way it's supposed to. With all this going on, our river is like a creek running through our reservation when it's supposed to be the heart of everything. It's so sad to see it in the condition it's in compared to how our grandparents and our parents talk about it, how it's supposed to be lively and plentiful and give health food to our entire community and provide cultural resources for everybody so that we can remember who we are and not forget. We can practice our culture and it keeps us grounded. But with all these issues, we're not allowed to do that. With the Scott so low being a tributary to the Trinity, we don't even have salmon. We don't even have salmon anymore. Well, we have, our families used to catch 110 a summer, and now you're lucky to get 2. Natives are resilient, and we will fight for our resources and land into our very last breath, the same way that it's done for us. I just hope that when things are being taken into consideration, Native rights are recognized. We are people and we have rights to our land, and we should have more rights. We should have more say, and people should listen to Native voices, because that's the way that these things are going to get turned around. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Danielle. Reagan, appreciate you sharing your story. Next, we have Conrad Fisher, followed by Lamani Hutt and Justin Fredrickson. So with Conrad Fisher, if you would please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, I'm Conrad Fisher with Water Climate Trust. My home is on the Lower Klamath River in Karuk territory, and I've worked on issues related to water for Klamath River tributaries for more than 20 years. So I am grateful to CDFW for what they have done to get us to this point. We've been asking for a long time, and thank you, CDFW, for putting forth the science about what fish need. Today, like everyone else who has spoken so far, I urge the California Water Board to take immediate enforcement action to give the Scott and Shasta River what the fish say they need, according to CDFW's emergency flow recommendations, specifically the 2017 recommendation for the Scott by Fish and Game, and then McBain and Trush flows for the Shasta, as well as the TMDL action plan for the Shasta. All of the science and is there. Everything is what you need. And on timing, the fish need this by July. They can't wait till August, especially the fall Chinook for migration. And the Water Board has what it needs to make this happen right now. We've been asking the Water Board to put this on the agenda for a long time. I don't see it on there for next week, but I do see the racial equity resolution, which is related, of course, to all of this. The water board can and should curtail junior water users now within existing water law based on the ESA, public trust doctrine, reasonable use doctrine, to give the fish what science says they need now. I'm a little concerned about the amount of attention given by staff to these voluntary solutions. That's been going on to the tune of tens of millions of dollars for decades, and it has not worked. It could work, but in most cases, grant seekers don't ask for what is necessary, which is permanent dedications of water in stream, ushering the water all the way downstream, measuring cost effectiveness, and that is part of the reason they're not working. So water board, use the power you have now, curtail junior users. You can use public money to lessen the burden, but first and foremost, give the fish what they need. Safe harbor was touted as one solution. I would encourage the water board and CDFW not to sign the federal safe harbor agreement, because that will preclude giving fish what science say they need because of the deal struck by the feds with water users. Please don't sign that, water board and CDFW. And to the point of public funding to solve this problem, Wildlife Conservation Board needs to start measuring cost effectiveness in terms of dollars in and water out, because we're spending millions of taxpayer dollars and we truly to this point still don't know the effect we're having. And then to everyone listening, next week, the water board is talking about its racial equity resolution. I'm glad that is on the agenda. This is not on the agenda next week, but the racial equity resolution is on the agenda. So to everyone who has the governor's ear and to the water board, if you truly mean what you say in terms of racial equity for California's first inhabitants, you will do what everyone has so far asked you to do on this call today. Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad. Next, we have Lamani Hutt.
My name is Lamani Hutt. I'm a member of the Hoopa Valley Tribe, and I am here today to advocate for the Scott and Shasta rivers to ensure the preservation of the coho and Chinook salmon. The river is my mirror. It reflects the future of the health of my community. It connects us as people, for the river is a place to go, and it is at the center of all ceremonies for the Hoopa, Yurok, and Greater Northern California tribes. Over the last few weeks, I've noticed the major drop of water levels in the river. During the month of June, the river is usually high with swift currents. The Hoopa people know not to swim during this time, for it is not until July when the water drops to swimmable levels. This year that has changed. People are swimming in a normally unsafe time because the river has rapidly changed, with low water levels that have already begun to accumulate moss. I know that last year's fishing season was rough, with families being lucky to come home with one salmon. These are the effects of the Trinity River. As the river connects and salmon usually travel through various streams, the situation of the Shasta and Scott rivers have a drastic effect on multiple communities. This will eventually be a lose-lose situation. The Shasta and Scott rivers at their current state are running the risk of drying up. With no water, the farmers who defend and benefit from these dams will have no water for their crops. Wildlife will disappear and local communities suffer due to the lack of resources with the river gone. This is the main reason for regulations, to ensure the longevity of the river that provides a necessary resource to multiple outlets. Note that this year's winter was extremely dry, indicating that the river is in need of more water to sustain itself during the summer months. In Australia, the Darling River has recently been experiencing sections of complete dryout. This is due to the dams and water diversions. What once was a great river is now nearly nothing, leaving communities needing to truck in water for basic necessities and spending millions for pipelines to try to restore the water flow. The story of the Darling River will soon be ours if we do not take action now, as we are facing similarly low water levels due to water diversions. I fear for the salmon swimming home to spawn. I fear for the families who rely on salmon for food, and I fear for the generations of wildlife and people who rely on the high, swift river stream of June. Yet mostly, I fear for the tribes of Northern California, our way of life, our ceremonies, and our very existence. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Limani. Thank you for your time. Next, we have Justin Fredrickson.
Hello?
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name's Justin Fredrickson. I'm a environmental policy analyst. I'm at the California Farm Bureau Federation. I'm not from this area, but we're coordinating with our county farm bureau at that level locally and with the irrigators in that area, the ranchers and the farmers, who are just like everyone this year, severely impacted by the drought, which is a natural phenomenon. And so while I understand, of course, everyone understands the desire for, flowing rivers with abundant fish, droughts happen, and that is kind of what we're in the middle of. That's nobody's fault necessarily. It's a natural calamity, and it's something that we're all dealing with. My own perspective at the state level is that I'm interested in the drought, and we are at the state level are interested in the drought in general, in drought actions being considered and proposed in this area and elsewhere statewide. But rather than getting ahead of myself on that, I think where we would like to focus at this point is on talks around possible voluntary actions. And I'd also like to point out that there's a history of successful voluntary collaborative effort in this area, including the recent safe harbor agreement has been mentioned. That's actually a very unique safe harbor agreement. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It's kind of one of a kind and first of its kind. And I think it's a big step forward and also a testament to, the willingness to undertake this kind of effort in this area. So we are very interested in having those talks, and really I would direct the board to the locals in engaging in those talks, because they are the ones with the greatest capacity and the greatest knowledge, of course, to identify what those voluntary actions might be. A couple of requirements for voluntary actions would have to be that first, that they would need to be feasible. And some of the graphs that were shown during the PowerPoint, there was the red line with the recommendations from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And if you're to go back and look at many of those slides, the red line was well above natural flow, well above this year, and even in some cases above the average flow. So that to me suggests that it's not physically feasible. And so that's something that would need to be dealt with up front. A couple other points. The proclamation talks about voluntary agreements to achieve minimum flows. And I think that's possibly too narrow. I think that in addition to flows, we need to look at functional flows, also non-flow measures, other physical types of interventions, and go broader than just looking at flows alone and just looking at these flow recommendations. In part because these recommendations are only recommendations. And the water board has other options. One of the water board's roles is to balance.
Sorry to interrupt, but you're at time. If you could wrap up, please.
Okay. I think I'll stop there, and I may submit some of these additional comments through the email address. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you want to, finish up the comments by sending in an email to the Shasta Drought at waterboards.ca.gov. Otherwise, if we get through all of the speakers today, I will invite you to wrap up your comments at the end.
Yeah, I'll hold on and hold those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Up next, we have Susan Hart, followed by Elisa Noble, and then Ryan Walker. So I believe.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for the opportunity to listen. There's some wonderful ideas, and I think it's important to, I'm here, Susan Hart, representing the Hart Ranch on the Little Shasta, which is of course part of the Shasta watershed. We are, we're frustrated, but we're here to help. And we have worked with all the agencies for quite a few years, trying to address some of these challenges that have been expressed. We're very serious about the work we do. And as part of that, we worked and with actually NIMS, we received our safe harbor agreement for the Hart Ranch back in February of 2018. And part of that agreement, the Hart Ranch has dedicated over 3 river miles of Little Shasta for riparian management and habitat. Very importantly, in addition, we have part of that is to donate, or not to donate, excuse me, to dedicate water rights, are some of our most senior water rights permanently, and all of the water rights permissively through the 1707 process that was discussed by Ms. Orr in her early comment. And I would just like to speak to the difficulty in procuring those permits. We submitted our petitions back in the winter of 2019. We have worked through with the board, with the staff, tirelessly trying to get these permits secured, and we've been unable to do so. Importantly, we actually met in October of 2020. We met with board staff trying to find a way to effecate and get these permits passed. We focused on the importance that our safe harbor was developed around these dedications, and that it's so important to get this water into the stream. We told them the importance that we wanted to get this done by March of 2021, 2 years later. And to this point, we have yet to get the permits. So I respectfully ask and request that, and urge the Water Board to grant the Hart Ranch 1707 petitions for the dedication of water, both permanent and permissive. We also ask that you remove protest provisions as in a 1707 petition process, certainly in these drought-stricken watersheds. If that's not possible, at the very minimum, we ask that protestants provide validation of all necessary permitting, inclusive of CDFW 1600 permits and for any waters used and consumed. Additionally, they go through a rigorous audit of their water rights, be they decreed, water rights being used on decreed property, or riparian on riparian. We had to go through those standards in order to submit the petition. And at the very least, in order to have standing, we feel protestants ought to have to do the same. I want to encourage everyone to keep talking. And again, please honor and grant these petitions. It's not so easy to get the water in the stream. We've had it. I looked at those graphs. Had we been honored and granted our 1707 petitions, we would have put water in the stream, and that graph would have looked nicer in March of 2021, March of 2022. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Susan. Up next, we have Elisa Noble. Lisa, you should have I believe you're on mute now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment on this important issue. I was fortunate to have been born and raised in the Shasta Valley, and since then have had a career in ag and natural resources, and really enjoy trying to find the common ground. I'm new as the executive director for the Scott Valley and Shasta Valley Water Master District. And so providing comment on behalf of the district, briefly, we are a public agency created by AB 1580 in 2007 In 2012, the Siskiyou County Superior Court appointed the district as deputy watermaster for the service areas. We're overseen by a board of 7 directors who are elected by diversion owners or appointed by the Siskiyou County Board of Supervisors. The district currently serves 283 diversion owners with adjudicated rights on the Shasta River and the French Creek tributary to the Scott River. Please note that the district serves only a ministerial role in implementing the decrees which outline the legal water rights of diversion owners. We would like to start by recognizing that many landowners are already implementing voluntary measures to reduce their impact on stream flows. Particularly a great example, the previous speaker, Susan Hart, is a great example and also speaks to where we can find improvements in the mechanisms to do these actions. We strongly encourage the State Water Board to maximize all opportunities for voluntary measures to address these issues. We're willing to coordinate with diversion owners in developing a set of voluntary measures that could meet the in-stream flow requirements. We also encourage the board to consider financial compensation where these increased in-stream flows are voluntarily met. Certainly leaving more water in the river is going to have an impact on those businesses, and we would encourage compensation there. In order for voluntary measures to be possible, landowners need to know that the target in-stream flows are realistic and based on data that have the best chance of helping the fish. We strongly recommend that the current requirements be amended to include additional relevant data, such as actual presence of fish in what reaches during what periods, and we can provide more details with that information in writing. We'd also like to encourage the board to consider the groundwater impacts on surface water. We don't want to pit water users against each other, but it is worth noting that there are groundwater extractions that impact surface water flows. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, we have Ryan Walker. Ryan, you should have a message for you to unmute yourself.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
You can.
Oh, hello, my name is Ryan Walker. I am the president of the Siskiyou County Farm Bureau. I want to thank the board for taking the opportunity to put together this workshop. You don't need to tell us that we are in an extreme drought, and I think all farmers agree that actions need to be taken to blunt the impact of this extreme drought on anadromous fish populations. We realize that our livelihood is tied one way or another to salmonid populations. I want to thank Ms. Orr for mentioning much of the work that's been done by stakeholders already for decades in these 2 watersheds, not to mention that we've also developed a great amount of information. We've mapped refugia, we've pit tagged fingerlings to figure out where they go in the summer. We've removed flashboard dams and impediments to rearing coho movement within the systems. We have a widespread monitoring system that monitors flow, temperature, DO, and other relevant tailwater and live stream matrix. And with all of this work that's been done by stakeholders, and it's not just ranchers. In fact, the Water Board has been a partner in many of these, as have the tribes, as has Fish and Game. We've developed a toolbox to be used in events like this extreme drought. And that's why it's particularly frustrating to see these proposed flows that take a single factor. And for the Shasta River to take the gauge at Wairika seems odd, just because the Montague Grenada Weir are so often used as a gauge, but nonetheless, a single flow factor that doesn't take into effect what the fish needs are during different fish life cycles You know, right now we need to be worried about expanding cold water refugia. It doesn't matter how much water we have in the canyon and the Shasta, it'll never be the right temperature to rear coho. Later, interconnectivity of the Scott matters. Later, things like temperature within the canyon matters. But we need to have a much more focused, much more nuanced approach using this toolbox that the Water Board has spent literally tens of millions of dollars to develop. And the Siskiyou County Farm Bureau stands ready to facilitate these voluntary programs. I think that we can achieve a lot. Just that pulseful we saw earlier in the year in the Shasta is an example of what can be accomplished. We have well-developed water transaction systems in both watersheds already that can be used for voluntary dedications, but we need targeted dedications. We need to make sure all barriers to fish movement are there. And then when the time for inflow, in-migration, out-migration comes, we can work on those as well. But I would just suggest both voluntary and much more nuanced approach to this. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Ryan. Next, we have Regina Chigazola. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Please correct me if that's the case. Then we have Brandon Chris, followed by Nick Jocelyn.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Hi, my name is Regina Chigazola. I'm calling in today from Save California Salmon, and I live on the Klamath River. And I do work in a lot of watersheds throughout California. And I just wanted to say that the allocation in the upper basin for water deliveries is extremely low this year. In the Sacramento River, I think there's a 5% allocation for most water users. In truth, yes, we have a drought, but it is a drought that's caused by climate change, and it's going to become more common. And everywhere else in the state I'm aware of, people are being curtailed. And it's going to happen in the Scott and Shasta also. These are the main salmon producing tributaries for the Klamath River, and for the upper basin farmers to be getting cut off and then the Scott and Shasta farmers not to, it's not fair. I completely support some of these voluntary agreements. I completely support the 1707 dedications, and the Heart Ranch story is really disheartening for sure. And I hope that they start moving faster, but also a lot of 1707 dedications just get pulled out by water users further downstream or by groundwater pumping. And in truth, there is unreasonable use going on in the Scott and Shasta. And there's a lot of unfair situations where there are people trying to do the right thing, but then there are people who are not. There are people who have open ditches that are flood irrigating, that are returning really disgusting tailwater to the river systems, that are illegally bulldozing and putting up flashboard dams. And in truth, there needs to be regulation. There needs to be curtailments. There can't be only carrots. There also needs to be sticks. I've heard about a lot of people saying that they're going to go for even more cuttings of alfalfa this year because the prices are so high and because the water board is not doing anything. And it's not a fair situation. Ultimately, we need action now and by the end of July, but ultimately we need to look at re-adjudicating these watersheds and looking at the groundwater pumping, especially within the Scott River, because these are not fair adjudications. They don't look at the health of the river. They don't look at the water rights of the tribes. And they are killing off the salmon in the Klamath River. And the water board is ultimately, and Fish and Game is ultimately responsible for protecting the public trust and for protecting the tribal trust, and not just for making sure that as many cuttings of alfalfa can happen within these watersheds. This is water that should be coming to the Klamath River. This is key habitat, and something needs to be done. And it needs to be done quickly. So I thank you so much for taking some action, but we don't have 6 weeks. Please go with the Crook Tribe's petition, and please also take similar action in the Scott River. And the safe harbor agreements is not really the answer. We need real regulation, and we need it right away. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. I see Brandon Fawaz has their hand up. We will ask if you would like to submit or say a public comment to please type into the chat your name, title, organization, and email address. And we'll capture you and your intent to comment and add you to the queue. Thank you. So next we have Brandon Chris. Brandon, you should have a message asking you to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you, yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. This is Brandon Chris. I'm Siskiyou County Supervisor for District 1, representing part of the Shasta River watershed. I agree with what the Farm Bureau said, both the lawyer earlier and the recent president of the Farm Bureau. We have to take into account the natural conditions. This is naturally a drought. I know there's been some statements saying that farmers and ranchers have not had to have their water cut this year. The Montague Irrigation District, which is the Montague Water Conservation District, I see my timer still on. So if, but I see the Montague Water Conservation District is dry this year. They don't have water. So the farmers and ranchers are making their sacrifices in regards to not having water this year. The city of Montague almost ran dry of water this year. So the citizens, as well as the farmers and ranchers, have been impacted and are making those sacrifices for the fish. In the Shasta Valley, for the Shasta River, they've done fencing for riparian habitat and all those sorts of factors for many, many years. I know the focus on water flows itself is important on the number of water, but we have to take into account that in 1992, there was low flows on the Klamath River, about 30,000 salmonoid returned in 1992, which was a low water year for the Klamath River in general. Yet the cohorts for them for that year were very high returns, 212,000 in 1995 and 178,000 in 1996. So it wasn't just water volume alone. It's the flow of the salmon populations. There's other factors as well. So we asked the Water Board not just to focus on water, but I agree with what Mr. Walker said on the timing for those water flows and the timing for getting those things done. The farmers and ranchers behind the Safe Harbor project have been putting a great deal of work into that. It's set as a compromise where there's give and take, and they are definitely giving in order to try to promote the salmon populations in Siskiyou County and for the coast. Farmers and ranchers realize that, just like Mr. Walker said, that the higher the salmon returns and the higher the salmon population, the better it is for everybody. I'd like to close with something that was said in Fish Bulletin number 34 back in 1930 to put some historical context on this. It said, the Shasta River enters the Klamath. It's a stream that was formerly famous for its salmon. And that was said back in 1930. In 1931, 82,000 Chinook returned to the Shasta River. So history has its cycles, and we ask for balance for naturally the fish, but also for agriculture and city water. I probably don't want to run over time. I want to respect that since the timer started late. So I'll stop here at 1 minute left, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Supervisor Chris. Up next, we have Nick Jocelyn, followed by Jack Roggenbuck. And after that, we have Felice Pace.
Hi, my name is Nick Jocelyn. I'd just first like to start by thanking Fish and Wildlife for asserting that the science does currently exist to develop a permanent baseline flow for the Shasta River. Really appreciate the efforts they've made recently. I'm a 5th generation resident of the Shasta Valley, and I've seen how the politics have held back progress. My family went extinct in the early 2000s. At the time, it was the earliest of the fish and flow requirements. I understand the grief that's associated with losing tradition and a lifestyle. But at this point, voluntary steps have been too little and too late. There's too much water promised, and this water exists only on paper. That has to be changed. Per one Safe Harbor agreement participant, as much as $80 million has been spent on water efficiencies and fish passage improvements. Yet there's been no cost effectiveness analysis for these projects, either individually or cumulatively. In the end, what my family learned in the value of our ranch was that it basically had no value except for the water rights. And I think it's time that the analysis of all these projects lets us determine what that value actually is. And until then, we're basically going to be spending money on improvements that will make no difference if water is not left in the stream. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for sharing the story. Up next, we have Jock Rosenbuck, followed by Felice Pace and Amy Campbell. Jack, if you would like to unmute yourself. I'm not sure if I see Jack still here in the meeting, but I will circle back with you after our next speaker. So we'll move forward with Felice Pace. You should have an invitation to unmute your microphone.
Okay, yeah. Hi, my name is Felice Pace. I'm the water chair for the North Group Redwood Chapter Sierra Club, and I also represent the Motherlode chapter on the Scott. I'm going to start my video so you can see me too. I lived in the valley, Scott Valley, from 1976 until 2002, and I lived down in Klamath Glen in Polikla, which is their own word for the Yurok. I live in Polikla territory, formerly lived in Shasta territory, and I'm grateful to be able to live in these lands. Been working on these issues, fish and water issues in the basin since 1980. And I've seen a lot of voluntary actions. Funding has been given, funding has been taken, but where's the public benefit? We just don't see it. For example, back in the 90s, I was part of the Scott Valley Crimp. We did alternative stock water for everybody that wanted to. They got a well and a pump so that they wouldn't have to divert. They took the well and the pump. They still kept diverting, and they still are. So these, we need to go to emergency regs right now. The State Water Board needs to do that. Thanks to the Yurok tribe and to ELF for making that petition. We've already, actually, the State Water Board has already wasted too much time because this was completely predictable. We knew it was happening, and it happened last year. You know, we've had, like John and Carol Spencer, they've dedicated a French Creek water right in stream. Yeah, it gets down French Creek, but then it's taken immediately, probably by the Scott Valley Irrigation District. It doesn't get down to where the fish need it. So these are flaws in the adjudication, the Scott Valley adjudication, that have frustrated the Forest Service right. And the State Water Board, on its own initiative, should open that adjudication and fix those flaws. Now, I challenge the water users that are on this call. If you care about the fish, go ahead and stop irrigating so much right now. NRCS already has declared it has assistance for you. We're going to have emergency legislation for the Klamath. And so you will be made whole as you have been in the past. So we're going to see, let's see your voluntary actions right now. Fish, by the way, the fish have a right to the water. The people and the public trust have a right to the water. We should not have to pay anybody for our right. We have that right. Stop taking and start giving agriculture. Very frustrated with the reaction of the Farm Bureau right here, saying that impaired flows that are everybody's taking water out of are natural flows. Come on, where's that coming from? Thank you.
Thank you, Felice. I see Jack Roggenbuck has their hand raised. So Jack, I'm going to send your message asking you to unmute yourself.
Can you hear us?
Can't hear you. We can.
Oh, you can hear us now? Great. Thank
Yes.
you. I'll try to be brief. I am Jack Roggenbuck, president of the Shasta Watershed Conservation Group, a group formed to voluntarily obtain a safe harbor agreement with state and federal partners for protection of coho salmon in the upper Shasta and Parks Creek drainages. We have worked closely with the permitting agencies for nearly 10 years to develop strategies to improve habitat for fish in the permit area. The strategies include a flow management activity to cover all life stages of the protected species. This was accomplished through many meetings involving not only permitting agencies, but the involvement of NGOs such as Cal Trout and the Nature Conservancy, as well as many consultants and individuals familiar with the requirements for improved and viable habitat. The issue before us today is the potential order to cease all irrigation in the Shasta and Scott rivers due to unprecedented drought and lack of water in these systems. Currently, we recognize flows are minimal and do not provide what has been argued by some to be minimal requirements. High temperature and low dissolved oxygen levels are reaching critical level, and as some advocate to increase minimum flows as a solution, there is no evidence such increase of flows with these parameters is helpful to fish. The Shasta Watershed Conservation Group recognizes this and seeks to offer an alternative to the blanket order covering all irrigators that would reduce or stop total diversion of water. The Safe Harbor Agreement has a component to it which identifies flow management strategies for all life stages of fish in various conditions related to weather years, such as wet or normal or dry or extremely dry water years. The flow management strategy focuses on keeping cold water available in those areas critical to the survival of the fish at that life stage while affording the permit holder the means to continue draw upon his or her water right, albeit at a reduced amount. This strategy was developed after many years of debate and negotiation and science to determine what is best opportunity to help the habitat and fish. We ask that the board consider such a plan developed for just this type of condition to play out through this emergency and be exempt from any cessation order issued by the board. The board has an opportunity to be an example of working with individuals and organizations and agencies by considering this request. The board can ask for voluntary compliance, seek compliance through support of programs such as the Safe Harbor, the carrot approach, or for those who wish to ignore and wait for regulatory involvement, such as the blanket order, the stick approach. By encouraging others to voluntarily comply through such organized efforts, improvements should be more easily obtainable without alienating the stakeholders. We request the board to develop an order that allows for existing plans with flow management requirements embedded into those plans or agreements to continue as intended for this condition. The upside is to allow for the evaluation of those plans or agreements to ascertain if the end result was as expected. This is the actual event from which the data can be obtained. Heretofore, only theoretical modeling was the means to draft such plans.
Excuse me, Jack.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your time is up and we did let you go a little over in case
Okay,
you were
thank
not
you very
able
much.
to see. But we
I'll
do
send a
want to
copy
hear,
of it.
yeah, if you want to email the rest of your comment to Scott Shasta Drought
We'll
at
take care of that this
waterboards.ca.gov.
afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are at 3:48. The meeting was scheduled to go to 4 p.m., but we have about 13 more commenters left. So we are extending the meeting to 5 p.m. So up next, we have Amy Campbell, followed by Vivian Halliwell, and then Gary Black.
Hi, this is Amy Campbell. I'm a project director for the Nature Conservancy. And the mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and water of which all life depends. And as a conservation organization, our primary goal is to provide a voice for nature while working in collaboration with people whose well-being is also reliant on healthy and thriving ecosystems. TNC has spent the last 20 years working in collaboration with people in both the Scott and Shasta River basins, collecting the science, developing strategies, and implementing solutions that aim to balance the water needs of nature with the water needs of our local communities. But right now we are in unprecedented drought times. We've never seen conditions this dry in either of these watersheds. And during this crisis, we've got to acknowledge that emergency actions are needed to protect nature both in Shasta and Scott River basins. But we also recognize that the adverse impact of this will also cause impact to our local communities and partners. But without action, we may also cause irreversible damage to our local ecosystems, which is something we all depend on. We support a variety of science-informed actions, both collaborative and regulatory, that create immediate benefits to the ecosystems in these basins, and including mechanisms to deliver more flow and stream. But the responsibility for increasing stream flow shouldn't fall on just surface water diverters, but should be the responsibility of all water users in these basins. And that includes groundwater users as well. So in addition to supporting actions that will create immediate benefit now to these systems, TNC is continued in our commitment to work with our state and federal agency partners and local stakeholders in these basins to implement actions that will minimize the impacts of a continuing drought on water supply reliability for nature and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Next, we have Vivian Helliwell, followed by Gary Black, and then Andre Sanchez. So Vivian, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. As a commercial fishing family on the coast, we've been restricted from fishing in the Klamath Zone for about 30 years. Out of the ports of Eureka, Fort Bragg, and people who traveled to fish here for salmon. The Scott and Shasta rivers are the major producers of salmon on the Klamath River below the dams. And the last number of years, these fish are not getting the water that they need. And that's going to lead to their extinction in our lifetime if it's not addressed immediately. It's not a good idea to wait weeks to provide this water. And I'm going to ask that the water board please provide this water now and not wait to address groundwater as well as surface water. As far as developing stock watering provisions that would precede what the fish need, stock can be paid for, they can be replaced, they can come another year, but when these fish are extinct, the stocks of fish need water, and we're the only ones speaking for them, are the people who rely on these fish. The economic health of several coastal communities relies on the future of these fish stocks. I agree with the comments of Nat Kane and others who are asking this to happen sooner and not later. I appreciate the efforts of the people who live in the Scott Valley, which is very beautiful up there, and it just makes you want to be a farmer. It's not enough right now, and we ask immediate action from the board to take care of these fish before they wink out. We follow the prescriptions of the Pacific Fisheries Management Council that was developed by the Magnuson-Stevens Act. We participate in all the discussions of what's allowed for fishing in the ocean. And when our fishing is curtailed, you know, sometimes we get disaster relief, sometimes we don't, but we continue to work with people wherever we can to provide what needed for the fish in healthy. And as the gentleman from the Farm Bureau said, when the salmon, good for everyone. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Vivian. Up next, we have Gary Black, followed by Andre Sanchez, and then Karine Dadigan. So Gary, you should have a message asking yourself to unmute.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Black. I live in Scott Valley on a farm. We grow organic alfalfa and grain. And for the last 26 years, I've been working in the Scott and the Shasta doing water conservation, fishery enhancement, and protection work. And you all know that droughts are difficult times, and you know, they're difficult on both of the areas that I work in, both from an agricultural standpoint or fishery standpoint. But agriculture, you know, is not producing at 100%. I made decisions on my farm, just like a lot of my neighbors, to reduce the volume of alfalfa that I was going to grow this year. I grew more grain, which uses way less water. Irrigation stops sooner as a result of the drought. A lot of my neighbors did as well. And I worked for the Montague Water Conservation District. They are irrigated for 2 weeks. That's the only irrigation that they got. That's one irrigation cycle for a portion of the users that are out there. Montague Water Conservation District has had a 1707 petition in since 2015. People are trying to do the right things. People are doing the right things in these watersheds. In severe droughts, there's just not enough, and we have to be very surgical about what we do. And so therefore, I'm promoting that we don't take the recommendation of Fish and Game at just the value of flow targets at the bottom of each watershed, but be more surgical about our restoration approaches through these drought years, as well as through all water year types. We zero in on species and life stage needs more than a gauge target. We know where the coho are oversummering in the Scott and in the Shasta. Let's zero in on those and find incentive-based solutions to produce oversummering habitat. Let's focus on fall flows for Chinook in both watersheds. It's difficult in the Scott. Let's zero in, and I think we can make voluntary actions that are meaningful. We've been talking about it within agriculture, and again for coho migration, I think we can do it. But it doesn't have to be a draconian measure. We need to work with the agencies, including the State Water Board, Fish and Game. We work with NOAA and come up with these specific management strategies based on species and life stage, and try to find a reasonable approach through voluntary measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Next, we have Andre Sanchez. Andre, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hello, can you hear me?
You can.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments towards the Scott and Shasta River watersheds drought response. I want to thank the Water Board staff and the CDFW staff for putting this event and presentation together. Again, my name is Andre Sanchez, and I am the San Joaquin Valley organizer for the California Wilderness Coalition, also known as CAWILD. In my current position, or in addition to my current position, I have a background in wildlife, fish, and conservation biology. And in a personal capacity, I've recreated and experienced the watersheds in the region when I previously resided in Humboldt County. As other speakers have recommended, I urge the Water Board to quickly and appropriately adopt emergency regulations for the benefit of fish and wildlife, which also translates to benefits for people in the form of ecosystem services, recreational opportunities, a recreation economy, and an important resource for Indigenous people. Specifically in terms of the Scott River, from its confluence with the Shackleford Creek to its confluence with the Klamath River. It is a California state and national wild and scenic river. As a state and federal wild and scenic river, the State Water Board regulations require the Water Board to declare the Scott River to be fully appropriated under the State Water Board Rights Law, which is Water Rights Order 98-08. As state agencies, the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Water Resources Control Board are required to protect the Scott River's free-flowing condition and extraordinary anadromous fisheries values under the California Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which states all departments and agencies of the state shall exercise their powers granted under any other provision of the law in a manner that protects the free-flowing state of each component of the river and the extraordinary values for which each component was included in the system. And all local government agencies shall exercise their powers granted under any other provision of law in the manner consistent with the policy and provisions of the chapter. These protections not only apply to the new water rights applications, but also to the Water Board's responsibility to protect the public trust and use of water, as many others have pointed out. The Water Board has the authority under law to reduce existing water rights to ensure continued flows in the Scott River in order to sustain its endangered coho fishery. In terms of the Shasta River, the 7-mile segment of the lower Shasta River, where it flows through federal public lands, including the National Forest, and as well as the main portions of the Bureau of Land Management, were determined to be eligible for National Wild and Scenic River protections by the Bureau of Land Management, but due to its free-flowing condition and its outstandingly remarkable fishery and scenery values. The Shasta River's outstanding fish value has been described by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife as supporting the single most important salmon spawning tributary of the Klamath River. And the Klamath River is both, as I mentioned already, a state and national wild and scenic river. And state agencies, both the CDFW and Water Board are required to protect the free-flowing condition and extraordinary anadromous fish values of the river and under the California Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. So that all said, it's a responsibility to extend the protections to the Shasta River since it's one of the most important salmon spawning tributaries for the Klamath. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Andre. Up next is Corinne, followed by Preston Harris, and then Ada Fowler. So, Corinne, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
You can.
Okay. I now Corinne Dadigan. I'm with Save California Salmon. I'm Yurok and a descendant of Waithquell Village. And I would just like to comment that the Scott and Shasta rivers are top salmon producing tributaries to the Klamath River, which is extremely hot. The Klamath experienced a huge juvenile fish kill already this spring. Scott and Shasta rivers will soon be dry if action is not taken. State and federal resource managers need to enforce current laws intended to keep streams and fish in good condition instead of continuing to prioritize and manage our rivers for the benefit of agricultural diversions. The State Water Resources Control Board needs to address the crisis by issuing temporary emergency regulations, establishing minimum 45 cubic feet per second in-stream cold water flow in the Shasta River, and at least 30 to 50 CFS in the summer for the Scott River. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we have Preston Harris. Preston, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to talk today. It's obviously a very important topic that we're trying to tackle with a very complex set of circumstances. And I just want to emphasize the need to really focus on the voluntary process. So as the executive director of the Scott River Water Trust, for almost a decade and a half, my organization has made every effort to advance short-term and long-term flow enhancement opportunities in the Scott River and even outside the Scott River within the greater Klamath Basin. And the need for support of this voluntary work is more pressing than ever. I've heard a lot of comments today about voluntary work, both on the Scott and Shasta side, where many of those comments have been positive. There has been a bit of misinformation spread So I always encourage folks to at least reach out and get the proper info on these transactions and the work that we do, because it is very important. It does take a lot of work from multiple partners that we collaborate with throughout the watershed to make the smallest water transaction possible. And it is critical that we advance this type of work with our agricultural producers in the basin. And I would also say that in the future, I'm always open to folks reaching out to get more information about flows in the Scott River. Again, there's a decent amount of misinformation or inaccurate information that's been tossed around, and I always encourage folks to reach out to myself or other experts in the basin to discuss these topics in more detail. I'm not entirely sure that a hammer approach to regulation is necessarily going to render any more water than is already available in the basin. And it's very important for folks to understand that even if we shut down, we may not see any results. And then what have we gained? That's a very important idea to discuss. So as we move forward, I ask that we do continue to focus and prioritize the voluntary basis, or the voluntary processes in this basin, as well in the Shasta. This work is meaningful. It will help advance coho objectives and other salmon objectives in our watersheds. And hopefully that we can all come together to try and find some type of meaningful conclusion to this and keep it civil, because it's going to be a very difficult process that we work through, but it is a process that we can have success with. Thank you.
Thank you, Preston. Next, we have Ada Fowler, followed by Crystal Robinson, and then Tom Meng. And again, if I mispronounce your name, I apologize, and I would appreciate the correction. So Ada Fowler, if you would like to unmute. I don't see an audio connected with one of your accounts. So I did change the permissions briefly. So if Ada Fowler, if you're calling in and have a line separate to whatever you're using to log into the Zoom app, feel free to unmute yourself by pressing *6.
Thank you. Yes, I couldn't unmute. Can you hear me? I assume you can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So my name's Ada Fowler, and I'm a project manager in the Shasta Valley for CalTrout. And I want to thank the State Water Board and TDFW for having this call and allowing me to speak. At CalTrout, we work to ensure resilient wild fish thrive in healthy waters for a better California. And it's our belief that abundant wild fish indicate healthy waters, and that healthy waters benefit all Californians. We encourage using innovative science-based solutions that work for a diverse interest of fish, farms, and people. So CalTrout has been working collaboratively and voluntarily with water rights holders to improve flows in the Shastas for probably 20 years. And we've invested in infrastructure upgrades to coordinate flow management and to improve on-ranch irrigation practices, and dedicated that the conserved water in stream for fish. But without some common sense regulatory enforcement of the existing laws, the investments may be wasted. CalTrout supports using the best science available and supports the minimum flow recommendations by California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the McBain and Trust 2014 ones they're using. We believe that flows can be only achieved through a variety of science-supported voluntary efforts and targeted regulatory actions that enforce existing laws. We commend DFW for proposing the minimum flows and support the need for immediate actions from the State Water Board. CalTrout is committed to working with our agency partners and local stakeholders to implement actions that will minimize the impacts of this drought water supply reliability of its aquatic systems and its people. And that's all I really had. So I was quick. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ada. And next we have Crystal Robinson.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. My name is Crystal Robinson. I'm the director of the Natural Resources Program for the Quartz Valley Indian Reservation, which is located in the Scott River Basin. I am a tribal representative on the Scott River Groundwater Advisory Committee, and I just want to say today that I want to emphasize that the science in the basin indicates actions need to be taken now to ensure that flows are being met by the end of July, and that will help ensure that the fall migration for Chinook can occur. We don't have a month and we don't have 2 months to work on this. We have maximum. We also have an unprecedented drought this year, and thinking we can rely on 6 to 7 CFS in September, looking at the previous year's data, is not due diligence. There must be flows greater than the bare minimum suggested by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to ensure fish and cultural resources for future generations. Voluntary actions do not have a history in the Scott of being collectively successful to meet the needs of fish in the basin. I've been working here and watching for 20 years. And while I thank everyone who's acted voluntarily, it's the voluntary only approach that's contributed to this problem. But we've been trying voluntary actions for 20 years, and here we are today. So mandatory actions are now both necessary and appropriate given the population of listed species, as well as all the tribal trust species and aquatic resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Up next, we have Tom Men, followed by Sari Samarstra, and then Glenn Spain. So Tom, you should have permission to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can.
I'm Tom Minnie, farmer in Scott Valley for about 45 years. I disagree with what some of the people have said that, you know, there's no room for voluntary action. I think there's plenty of room for voluntary action. You know, we're 3 years of working on Sigma, I think so far, maybe even more. We haven't even submitted a plan yet, and already something has stepped in front of that. And, you know, we're not even going to be able to continue with that. I mean, we're going to continue with that work, but what does it say for our efforts so far to come up with a plan for sustainability when this sort of thing is happening? My neighbors and other farmers in the valley have moved in the direction of irrigation efficiency. I know on my property, I don't do anything without looking at my soil moisture sensors with efficient irrigation. I think if you use the hammer approach with emergency regulations instead of a voluntary approach, you probably won't get anybody agreeing to do anything in the future. I think it will move that process backwards completely to the point where no one's interested in talking to agencies. I think the voluntary effort is essential. I don't think it's time to use the regulatory emergency effort to somehow magically make the river get to a bar that you've set at a flow that in a historic drought isn't reasonable. It's not going to happen. It's an historic drought. The river is not just magically going to come up because you've set a flow recommendation and then meet that. No matter what you do, that's not going to happen. There's things that you can do that will definitely benefit, but through a voluntary process, it can happen. In fact, you know, fish are not going extinct. The numbers have declined recently in the last 5 years, but they're not going extinct. I think there's a lot more work that can be done, and working with the farming community and others in the basin is the right way to go. That's all I have.
Thank you, Tom. Up next, we have Sari Samastra. I'm not sure if they are still in the meeting. But I will change the permissions again in case we're just not able to find them in the participant list. So sorry if you are still in the meeting and you would still like to provide a public comment, please unmute yourself through the reaction tasks in your taskbar or by pressing *6 if you're calling in. Okay.
Hello, I'm finally got it done.
Oh,
thank you. I'm sorry. I'm under Tom Jobson's access here, so it was a little confusing how to do that. I'm Sari Sommerstrom. I've worked in the Scott River since 1988 on lots of watershed projects, and there's just so many things to cover here. I appreciate what's been said already by Gary Black and Ryan Walker that we need to target the flows and where we know the fish are and the habitat needs at the right time, and not this simplistic flow proposal that's just coming out of the 1974 Fish and Game recommendation for the Scott Decree. The coho juveniles right now are in two tributaries, French Creek and Shackleford Creek. Those are two separate adjudications from the Scott River Decree. All we hear about on this proposal is the Scott River Decree and the main stem. If you want to protect coho juveniles right now, those decrees need to have curtailment. The Water Board has already issued a curtailment June 1st for the junior water rights on the Scott Decree, but they neglected those other two critical adjudications. The Shackleford Creek does not have a water master, so it's difficult without a water master. The state has not supported water master service there for many years, and that's sad. French Creek does have a water master, a local district, and they can help shepherd water through 1707 dedications and other things that the Water Trust has done. But you need to support water master service if you're going to do any type of curtailments, and hope that that water does get shepherded down. We know enough now that coho has a different run cycle than Chinook. They're trying to target the main stem right now. It's not where the coho are. The Chinook juveniles have basically moved out of the Scott River right now. So July 1, main stem Scott is not where you're going to help the coho juveniles. There's no coho adults in the system. There's no Chinook adults in the system. And almost all the Chinook juveniles are out. So if you want to help fish this month, work on French Creek and Shackleford Creek. And the other thing is the coho run is not going extinct. When I started working here in '88, all I heard about was how the coho are basically extinct. And I worked on French Creek, which was told it was a train wreck. And so don't even bother spending money on French Creek. And French Creek is our highest producer of coho right now because we did so much work on sediment control, water management, fish diversions, fish screens, livestock exclusion fencing. There's been a lot of voluntary work that has worked. That's why our coho numbers are going up. If you look at our brood numbers, what we need in the fall is rain, 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 rain. And we're not getting that till November, December. So you can mandate all the flows you want on the main stem. We can't deliver that. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Sari. Up next, we have Glenn Spain, followed by Bruce Schumacher, and then Brandon Fawaz. And I see someone just raised their hand named Rod, so I will ask the folks supporting me to include you into our queue. So Glenn Spain, give me a moment, I will give you permission. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me?
You can.
All right. My name is Glenn Spain. I'm the Northwest Regional Director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. I just want to emphasize that we are the other river-dependent industry, and we need water in the river. We've been closed down this year through all of our ocean fisheries in Northern California for the second year in a row. And it's been the common practice for almost 40 years, as Vivian Hellawell pointed out, to close the ocean fisheries in the Klamath Management Zone whenever the stocks are weak in the Klamath. And they are almost always weak, and they're getting weaker. And I don't think we can argue with the facts is that the coho are now at about 2% or less of their historic populations, and they are endangered fish. They are listed as threatened and endangered. We have thousands of jobs that depend on fisheries. Ocean fisheries get closed from several hundred miles of coastline when the Klamath stocks are low. We are under a weak stock management regime. It's not only the law, but it's good sound biology. The kind of neglect that we have been given these river systems and the kind of work that we need to do will help our industry enormously. Right now we're closed down. So I have certain sympathy for the farmers, but we've been closed down for almost 2 decades for the most part. We support the CDFW recommendations as Mike Belcik pointed out, as the emergency minimums. They are not what are biological requirements. They are emergency minimums just to get them through this year. Also, we need temperature issues. It is more than one-dimensional, not just flow. You need water quality, and there are TMDLs in place as well. Those have to be factored in. Those should be factored in with the flows. But the easiest way to get lower water temperatures is to have more flows. We support the Karuk tribe's petition for emergency rulemaking. I think it's more than past time to do that. That needs to be done as soon as possible. And in the long run, we need an all hands on deck. This is an all hands on deck emergency. That means we use voluntary efforts where they are available. We use regulation where they are available. We use water mastering to make sure that people don't cheat. There is illegal diversion. There are situations where somebody on one hand of one part of a stream will do wonderful work to put water in the river, and then it gets taken up by the next draw. The whole system is over appropriated. We need to get through this year, and then we need to deal with the long-term consequences of over appropriation and drought proof this basin, because this is not an isolated incident. This is the new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Up next, we have Bruce Schumacher.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a Shasta Valley property owner and also a board member with Friends of the Shasta River, which was just formed late last year by a group of Shasta Valley stakeholders who would like to see a better balance between the various uses of the river, various beneficial uses. And we are advocating for more water for fish in the river. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about the in-stream flow issue. First, we'd like to thank CDFW for making this recommendation to the Water Board, which we strongly support as a bare minimum. I think it's a false choice between voluntary and regulatory, but I think we clearly need a minimum in-stream flow to be set. And then we need voluntary agreements to help, and programs like Safe Harbor could help people, help diverters get to those in-stream flows. But right now it's backwards. We need to have the in-stream flows based on science, dedicated for fish first, and then we need to see how we can help agriculture diverters get to that point, where they can assist with those voluntary measures. But when we looked at the Safe Harbor Agreement, the sum total, there's no clarity that that's going to be enough to help endangered fish recover in the Shasta River. So we need minimum in-stream flows, and we also, yes, this year is a critical drought, but actually every year recently has been an emergency for the Shasta River, and we need a long-term solution for this that involves a permanent in-stream dedication for the Shasta River. It's going to need it's not just about the flow, as other speakers have mentioned, but we also need to look at temperature, quality of the water, and where in the in the basin, including tributaries, the Coho especially need, but also the Chinook need the water. So, but for this year, it's certainly an emergency. And if the water board is talking about an emergency, we need to take it serious as an emergency and get this done now and not wait till sometime in August. The time to act is now. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Up next, we have Brandon Fawaz. And I see somebody else has their hand raised. Okay, Brianna. I can't see the rest of your last name, but I'm going to ask supporting staff if they can capture you and add you to the queue. And Brandon, the floor is yours.
This is Brandon. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So I am a farmer and a groundwater user in the Scott Valley along Scott River, Reach 9. I am not a surface water diverter. I've heard some common themes here throughout listening to all these comments. Fear and frustration are two words that come to mind. I would like to echo that immensely. I am very fearful for my family, my 2 children, to have the chance to ever do what I do. I'm very fearful for the 10 families that I employ directly, the children that they have, and the roofs over their head. Not to take away from anyone else's fear, but it's very real for us too. And as we think about frustrated, I'm very frustrated too. I've been involved in probably every water group discussion or something that I think I could ever make time to be part of. I've been part of Farm Bureau, I've been part of Sigma, I've been part of many different groups. And I, to this day, have never been officially asked to do anything, to volunteer and do nothing. When I have seeked out assistance on certain projects, I've actually been discouraged because I'm maybe not a dual resource user. I'm only a groundwater user. So something has to change. Many people have said we're in an unprecedented drought. I couldn't agree more with that. But if we're going, what's caused the drought? No use arguing about it. That's where we are. If it is climate change and we're getting less rain or more rain, less snow, whatever that is, we can't change that. Certainly not within my lifetime. So let's play with the cards we're dealt. Maybe this is going to force the real discussion that there needs to be some changes in the Scott River, some projects that will bring more water for fish and in turn for farmers. The river was designed by the Army Corps of Engineers very well to be straightened and to drain. It's doing a great job of draining the bathtub of Scott Valley. We've now decided we don't want that bathtub drained. Let's not spend 10 or 20 years to think of projects and how we could fund them to fix that. Let's get something sooner moving forward. Being part of the Sigma committee, everything that I've seen from Dr. Thomas Harder shows that if I gave every drop of water that I had to give and I didn't use a single drop on a year like this, there would still not be enough water to meet what many would like for fish. I can't give all and have it not be enough. I'm willing to give something and be part of the solution. I surely tried not to be the problem. Me, along with many other farmers I know, use much less water today. You know, the saying, more crop per drop. We've improved our irrigation so much over the last 10 years that we use less water today than we did years past. So if there's a perception that agriculture is using more water than in the 70s, like I heard earlier, I would like to dispel that. I could show anybody around my operation or the neighbors just how much less water we are using. So I welcome a discussion with any department or agency that can talk with me in a non-threatening manner and help me be part of the solution. And let's try to see what we can do to get through this and work forward. Thank you. Oh, and lastly, I cannot echo and support the comments that Sari Summerstrom had enough. I feel that she was spot on, but I don't feel I'm qualified enough as a biologist or hydrologist to offer anything more in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Up next, we have Rod. And Rod, you should have permissions to unmute yourself now.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Very good. I'm Rod Dowse. I'm the district manager for the Shasta Valley Resource Conservation District, and definitely appreciate the board taking the time to hear some comment and the commenters on the variety of discussion we've had. The Shasta Valley RCD as an organization both has a mission, board driven and need driven within the Shasta Valley anyway, where we've really worked cooperatively with landowners, with agencies and other interested parties to really really work towards meaningful contributions and improvements within our river systems. No doubt, the impact of the drought has continued and is relatively strong at this point, given the conditions we've dealt with as far as spring and winter water and snowpacks. From the RCD's perspective, we definitely know that action is needed and urgently needed, but we would strongly recommend that we focus on collaborative and voluntary actions where we can make meaningful improvement within any reach of the river that we're working in. We know that in large part, most resource users, landowners, and impacted individuals definitely want to see a positive impact made and are willing through a lot of the actions that we've seen and organizations we've seen, really looking to make positive improvement and meaningful increase in at this point in flows is what the primary discussion is. It seems today is primarily flow driven. We definitely look to continue to work collectively and collaboratively with the agencies engaged and the landowners to make meaningful impact and improvement to help those factors. We're also engaged in a lot of the other discussions that have come up as far as other flow factors, or other habitat factors, including temperature, dissolved oxygen, as well as flows, and realize that definitely a science-based approach that we can get out and implement on the ground is something we're definitely interested in, and definitely know that within our system, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of good projects, quite frankly, on the table currently, even that either are in the planning process or in a holding pattern in some cases that will have an opportunity to make meaningful improvement. And again, that meaningful improvement is coming from voluntary and collaborative engagement. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rod. Up next, we have Kay Brianna Hernandez. And I believe that's the last person that we have on our public comment list. If, I guess this is the last call. If you would like to make a public comment, please chat your name, title, organization, and email address into the chat, and you can send that to the comments here person. Or you can raise your hand as well. If you're calling in by phone, you can do that by pressing *9. And if you have not yet sent in your email address to us, please do so in case we should follow up with you. And with that, I am going to give Kay Brianna permission to unmute themselves. The floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Oh, for some reason, your microphone became mute again. So how about now?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, so I'm a master's student in the wildlife ecology program currently, and I stand in support for making an emergency decision and acting as soon as possible for our salmon. And also I want to remind the board about the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, and that the treaties that have been set in place for tribal trust species should be honored. And Indigenous peoples have the right to have their treaties be honored, and for their livelihoods and for future generations. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So it appears we're at the end of our public comment list. So I want to invite some folks that went over their time if they would like to continue providing their public comment. I did make a list, but if I don't call your name and you still would like to continue your public comment, please let us know by either raising your hand or chatting us. So if Justin Fredrickson is still here, if you would like to continue your comment. Let's see. I'm going to give you, oh, looks like you have permission to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. It's
okay, great, thank you. I don't know, I wrote down a few other things. So one of the things I'd like to say is that feasibility, or is actually, hold on one second, whether we're talking about unimpaired flows, natural flows, or some combination of both, the reality is that recommendations in an historic dry year that target flows that are above where flows are even in years that are much wetter are by definition, almost infeasible, unreasonable, and frankly wishful thinking, as several people have pointed out. So what is the point of barreling down on something like that is not even probably feasible? Another point is feasibility is a problem is someone else's problem until it's your problem. When two people sit down and look at a shared problem and see what is actually possible, then it becomes a problem to be solved. And that's where I think we need to have that conversation of sitting down in a room and looking at what's possible through both a combination of voluntary agreements and whatever else it may be that may be needed this year. In terms of timing, the reality is that the things that VAs voluntary agreements could accomplish right now before the end of this irrigation season are things that could be accomplished before the end of this irrigation season, whereas other things should be done more deliberately over a longer period of time, and probably can't help this year anyway. They're not going to make it rain one drop more than it will drain before it starts to rain. So that's another point. And in terms of another thing I was trying to say is that recommendations are from the Fish and Wildlife Department are recommendations, and they should not, on their face constrain other possible alternative solutions. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking on things that we can get to work on and get done this year. Someone said all hands on deck. I would say it's also all tools on the table. This is so we need to get all the tools on the table and look at what is possible and doable in a nuanced manner, similar to what Gary Black and Sari Sommerstrom were saying. I thought they were also spot on, and so I would just highlight those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I believe Rob, if you're still on, or not Rob, I apologize. Jack Rogenbuck, if you're still on and you would like to finish your comment, please do so. I changed the permission, so if you're still on and you would like to finish your comment, please unmute yourself through the taskbar or by pressing *6. Okay. I see a Nick Jocelyn, so I'll turn the floor to you.
Hi, I didn't really use all my time, but since other people were chiming back in, I figured I would share some sort of immediate options that exist for coming up with the 50 CFS. These are provided to me by Friends of Shasta River. First, this was done in the Bay Delta in about 2015, require all the riparian users to document the riparian nature at the time of patent of lands irrigated with riparian water. This would show that there are illegal riparian use taking place in the Shasta River particularly. We could then take steps to make sure that the above water reclaimed from illegal riparian use isn't diverted by junior users, but instead goes all the way to the mouth. We also need to find a way to cause the existing 1707 water to be allowed to reach the mouth of the river and be properly tracked. This would happen by allowing the local water master to track this water. There's been some resistance in the water master being responsible for tracking riparian water that could be reclaimed if it's found to be illegally diverted. That would be potentially 6 to 8 CFS of water, plus Nature Conservancy, now Fish and Wildlife's 1707, which is 1 to 3 CFS, plus potentially the Hart Ranch. You come up with maybe 10 right off the top. And basically beyond that, you're going to have to start looking at some of the groundwater use and simply allowing the Sigma track, that's going to be a 5-year data collection project, is going to be too late. We know how connected the Shasta River is to the groundwater system. We can see when pumps turn on and off. The hydrograph for the Shasta is not the hydrograph of a river, it's the hydrograph of an irrigation ditch. It is not being treated or allowed to flow freely. There is a lot of cold water that is impounded, allowed to warm up, and then creates inhospitable conditions for fish. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, well, looks like we have no more public commenters. And with that, I want to say thank you to everyone. I think at the height of this meeting, there was about 193 participants here today. And so I appreciate everyone that stayed on and that provided their public comments and let us know, your thoughts and input on this matter. Because it is important and it is impactful. So thank you again for showing up, for providing comments, and for following the ground rules. And yeah, and with that, I want to pass it back to Eric Ekdahl to go over some next steps and closing.
Hey, hopefully everyone can see me. Well, first off, I do want to thank, it looks like there's still about 95 people in attendance yet. I want to thank everybody for participating today. 2.5+ hour meeting on this topic when there's a lot of other activities going on right now is a testament, I think, to the interest and the desire for everyone on this call to find a pathway forward and to identify issues that can come up with a collaborative but effective set of actions for the resources in the fisheries and the water users in these watersheds. I wanted to highlight a couple of things. Gentlemen, can you put the email address back up some point or somewhere on the screen? For people that do want to submit written comments, or if they have additional questions, really, we want to encourage people to please send those to the email address that we had highlighted earlier, and we'll see it's in the chat now, scottshastadrought@waterboards.ca.gov. I'll just acknowledge up front that we may not respond to every email, but we do read all of them, and we do incorporate that into kind of the thought process as we go forward. The other thing I wanted to highlight was that if there's interest in additional discussions or other opportunities for people to get together to discuss pathways, approaches, and it would be helpful for the board or board staff to be part of those conversations, or you want to have that conversation specifically with us, please also reach out to us. Send that email, send that request to the Drought email address listed below there in the screen. And we'll try to facilitate, attend, and respond to as many of those as we can, recognizing that there's only so many of us and we do have, I think, a relatively short time frame going forward. I do want to address a little bit of the time frame. We heard some comments today that we're asking the board to act now. And I do want to just highlight that the board did not have the authority to do emergency regulations until the Drought Proclamation was issued on May 21st. And the development of emergency regulations is not something that is typically done super quickly. We are trying to move as fast as possible, but I think that adds some nuance to the timelines and how quickly we could potentially move. I think it's unlikely that we could do emergency regulations in July, but potentially we could have a draft out for input or review in July for potential action and adoption in August. To highlight the potential for emergency regulations a little bit more, we heard some comments today, kind of on both sides of the spectrum, some advocating for quick and immediate adoption of emergency regulations in the proposed flows, others advocating for a more gradual approach that focused on voluntary measures. And in the end, it may be that we're looking at both. How can we use emergency regulations to highlight those voluntary actions that are already underway, to ensure that voluntary actions are helpful and productive and help us move towards a common goal? And it may be ambitious to try and do that in a month or a month and a half, but I think those are some of the conversations we're interested in having in the next couple of weeks. And we do anticipate the potential for another public webinar, maybe towards the end of the month or early August. I just want people to kind of put that on their radar right now in the event that that does get scheduled, and we'll try to let people know as soon as we possibly can. So with that, I want to again say thank you to everyone involved. Thank you to Jenna Lynn for helping to kind of facilitate the discussion and run the meeting. And again, we do plan on posting this recording in the next couple of days as well. So with that, unless there's anything else Jenna Lynn or Anne Marie or Dan or Tina or Joe or any of the other speakers want to do today or add today, we'll bid you farewell and look forward to hearing from you in the near future.
I take that as a no. So thank you everyone again. This meeting is adjourned and we will stop the recording now. And again, we'll be posting this in the next couple of days. Thanks everyone.